Welcome, everyone. We are pulling all of our BlackPAC members and volunteers and friends and supporters and partners together today to have a conversation about not just the election and the election outcome that so many of us continue to process and sort of think through what our strategy is going to be moving forward, how we're pulling together our community, how we're continuing to do the organizing that we need to do. But we also want to reflect a little bit today on what we are learning as we learn more about the electorate that turned out in November. We also want to reflect a little bit on the wins that we had. We know we had obviously a significant loss at the top of the election, but there were in states, and for all of you all who were doing work in your states, that there were some important and critical victories that happened that quite frankly will be the difference for many people in our community in terms of being able to have elected officials who can hold the line and continue to provide the kind of policies and resources that our communities are going to need. So those wins were important, and we want to talk about those. We want to talk about how we leverage those wins, and we want to talk about how we expand on the victories that we've had as we sort of move forward and try and press ahead to make sure that our federal government does not take us down the road that we've all were so concerned about and continue to be concerned about. But we have here this morning but a bit of the BlackPAC team that is going to help us to bring in some guests that we have, our partners from states, and we'll be bringing folks in and introducing them to talk about what happened in their states. Again, the things that we were able to accomplish in those states, even with the big loss at the top of the ticket. So we have Jessica Pace out of St. Louis, Missouri, who you all know, who does all the things in terms of not only our digital and social media. You all get the emails from her. Her and Trinity, who I don't see, are always making sure that we're keeping people up to speed on social media and making sure you all have things to share and to talk about. There's Trinity out of Pasadena, California. We have Alyssa, who you all have been keeping, or who has been keeping you all up with the village. You all know, because I know that everyone followed and or signed up to get the Village newsletter. And if you haven't, you should. That is Alyssa. Alyssa was our woman on the street throughout the election, going from city to city, harassing people on the street, getting them to talk about what they thought about the election and how they were going to engage. So that's the Village. We have Garrett, who sometimes is behind the scenes. Garrett's in our nation's capital, trying to figure out how he's going to get through January when the MAGA folks show up in his town. Garrett it was also one of our men on the street through the election. Garrett is oftentimes behind the scenes for folks who get our mail. And I know people know that we send out a lot of mail during election cycles. Garrett is the person who is behind those mail pieces for the most part. So this is a part of the BlackPAC team. We wanted to make sure that we got folks introduced so that you all can start to put for the names, the faces, the names that you have but don't have the faces. Here are some of them. So the team will be coming back in a little bit later on to walk through some of the conversations with our partners from states. So thank you all. And we're going to transition to a conversation about what we know in terms of analysis. So there's been a lot of pundits, for those of you who are still watching cable news, I know many people cannot take it, aren't happy with what they're hearing in terms of our mainstream media. But for those of you who have been watching the news in the aftermath of the election, there's been a lot of punditry, right? A lot of folks saying a lot of things that, quite frankly, one, are not helpful, but also just is inaccurate. There's been a lot of takes and a lot of hot takes about what happened, who showed up, who didn't show up, what the vice president did or didn't do. And quite frankly, a lot of that is unhelpful because people are giving these hot takes without any actual data. They're just saying things. And it's either because they're just venting their frustration. They're saying things because they really want things to be a particular way and they aren't and weren't, but they're just sort of trying to, fake news their way into a narrative. So we wanted to take a minute to bring on our friend and our pollster, Cornell Belcher, who is the founder of Brilliant Corners Strategy and Research. He is a political strategist. You all recognize him from MSNBC and his commentary, which I think we all were trying to pay attention to closely during the election because Cornell was felt like the only person who was actually making any sense, as he often does, and hopefully, will help us all understand today kind of his sense or his analysis of what happened, how we got to where we were, but also, to make clear that things weren't, the idea that somehow there was this massive landslide that happened, that there is a mandate that the Trump, incoming Trump administration has. All of those things are not quite accurate. And so, Cornell, I want to thank you for joining us this morning and sort of walking us through, what for where we are, right? Because there's still more data to come in. And I think that's the other thing that I think you would say is that people need to refrain, right, from just saying whatever comes off the top of their head, because there's still more that we need to uncover. Is that accurate in terms of the hot
That
takes
is accurate.
there?
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay. So I know you have some slides that you want to walk us through to sort of get a sense of a historical perspective, I think, and also sort of where we kind of landed in this election.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to walk us through some slides. And hopefully everyone can see my screen right now. One of the things I want to do for us is level set. I know there's a lot of hand wringing right now and a lot of hysteria, and a lot of anger and a lot of disappointment right now. But look, as someone with a lot of gray hair, I've been around a while, and I just want to level set for us. First off, because I remember, a permanent Republican majority, right? When in 2004, it was another devastating loss for us, and Democrats were wringing their hands, and Republicans were literally talking about a permanent Republican majority, and a lot of Democrats and progressives were losing their minds, thinking that we were facing a permanent Republican majority because that's what Karl Rove and Republicans were talking about after Bush won and Republicans had a resounding victory. By the way, a much more resounding victory up and down
Right.
the ticket and across the country back in 2004 than they had now. And they were literally talking about a permanent Republican majority. I know that feels a little bit like the same thing, and there was a lot of crazy hot takes. But at this time, I went to work for a guy by the name of Howard Dean, and what Howard Dean said was basically that we have to, in fact, engage voters more and more often, and we got to engage them everywhere. And perhaps we should have this crazy thing, maybe like a 50-state strategy, where we invest in grassroots organizations and we take this power, the central power, out of so much of Washington and actually invest in our infrastructure across the country and all 50 states. Now, check notes. There wasn't a permanent Republican majority in moving forward in this country. In fact, the part of the level set is that, and as many of you all know, and I'm just going to reinforce what you really know, is that American politics is like a Category 5 hurricane. It is tearing apart everything in its path, and everything you build up in its path, it will erode away and try to tear it down, and you constantly must be putting it back together again. Republicans learned that because in 2006, as you will remember, well, even in going in 2005, we started winning races. And in 2006, we took back Congress, and in 2008, we had a historic election of Barack Obama with the majority, right? Barack Obama won a majority in his first election. He won a majority. The second, we won back-to-back majorities, which does not happen in this country. But there's no permanence in American politics.
Mm-hmm.
One of the and a lot of it does have to do with the electorate and what's happening with the electorate. One of the things I want us to understand is that, look, if you look at how white voters have been voting since LBJ signed the civil rights legislation, and LBJ signed the civil rights legislation, he says, there goes the South for a generation, because he understood basically there goes the white vote. What he could have said was, there goes the white vote for the next several decades, because that's what's happened. Right. We won 59% of the white vote in 64, and we have not won a majority of the white vote since. We've done Democrats have done well, even with Carter at high watermark. That was when Nixon resigned, right? So you had quite a bit of turmoil, but look, 39 to 42%, and you've been losing. Bill Clinton won with 43% and 42%, but folks, without Ross Perot, those numbers don't add up. So of course, without Ross Perot, 41%, John Kerry loses. Barack Obama garnered 42%, and so he garnered roughly the same percentage of the white vote as John Kerry did. But instead of losing, Barack Obama won, and he won with a resounding majority. How did he do that? He did it, quite frankly, because of the work of a lot of folks like you all on this call, right? The difference between John Kerry and Barack Obama was about 8 million voters of color.
Right.
It wasn't all of a sudden this ideal that white voters were swinging towards Barack Obama and Democrats at a different rate than they had been before. They had not. They had not, right? The difference was a growing Black and brown electorate that, I know, a crazy idea, that from the very start of the Obama campaign, we said we were going to expand the electorate, which is a Dean thing, but Barack Obama gets a lot of credit for it. We're going to expand the electorate. We're going to bring in more people of color. We're going to make American electorate look more like the changing face of the country. That was a strategy. He went out there. It was our strategy to, in fact, make the electorate browner, and he does not win without that electorate being brown. About 11% of the electorate was new, and it was overwhelmingly diverse, more diverse electorate than it was before. Without that more diverse electorate, Barack Obama does not become president. This is how the electorate is changing, and it's changing dramatically, and we have to realize the changes in our electorate. In 1980, Ronald Reagan won 56% of the white vote. All right. He won 56% of the white vote, solid majority of the white vote. And it was one of the most historical landslides in our country's history at 56% of the white vote. All right. You got that? 56% of the white vote, historic landslide election, 14% of white African-American voters, 37% of Hispanic voters. It was a complete wipeout, all but 3 states. In 2012, Mitt Romney's team thought they had won the election. Why do they think they had won the election? Because they thought they didn't think that, quite frankly, they thought 2008 was a fluke. And they knew that they were running up the score with white voters. So Mitt Romney won 59% of the white vote in 2012. But look, it was, again, a landslide, but in the opposite direction. Nothing more encapsulates the power of the Black and brown vote, and the growing power of that vote than this, right? 56% of the white vote in 1980 won basically every state but three, right? It was an overwhelming landslide. Now, 59% of the white vote in 2012, and it was still a landslide in the other direction, because we have to engage and keep that diverse electorate engaged. And when you keep that diverse electorate engaged, you can win, quite frankly, with 41, 42% of the white vote, if in fact turnout is where it is. Now, the electorate in America is not going to get whiter, right? And a lot of the hot takes, right, it's getting browner. And every 4 years in an election cycle, if turnout being staying on track to where it is, with white voters not overwhelmingly turning out at huge rates across the board, more so than voters of color. And white voters do turn out at higher rates than voters of color, except for the Obama years. You should get an electorate that is about 2% browner. If all things stay even, about 2% browner, because the country isn't getting whiter. And again, a note to a lot of the hot takes out there, that is about really sort of trying to turn the corner on voters of color and try to chase Trump voters. It's you're going down a rabbit hole that absolutely has that has diminishing returns on it, and especially in battleground states, right? If you look at most of these battleground states that are coming online, folks are not coming online because Democrats are all of a sudden winning 5-6% more white votes, 8-9% more of the white vote, because they're not. They're coming online because of the growth and the diversity of these places in these states. If it's Arizona, if it's Nevada, right? We won Nevada in 2008, 2012. I remember before that, Nevada was a fairly red state. Arizona coming online, and even Colorado once upon a time was a red state. So a lot of even these states that are coming online now, they're coming online not because white voters are dramatically behaving differently. It's because of the power of the growing diverse electorate, and it's growing more diverse in the states that are coming online. And now those states are anymore. And central to that conversation is a state like Georgia. What I want us to understand is, and I said this in 2008, is that we really do have two electorates, and they are fighting for the future of this country. They're fighting to determine the direction of this country. One of these electorates are younger and browner, and they see themselves in this diversity. They're not anxious about the diversity, and a bit swath of that is also white voters. But another part of that electorate is older, less diverse, and I don't beat up on them for their anxiousness about a changing America. As a social scientist, I understand that if you're playing a zero-sum tribal game, you see the changes that are happening in America, and you're anxious about those changes. And they're fighting for the future of this country. And it's all about the makeup of the electorate, right? This conversation about voters swinging back and forth, and that's the difference in what happens in elections, it's negligible. There's no big swath of voters that are swinging back and forth and changing their minds. It's about the composition of electorate. You tell me the composition of electorate, and I'll tell you if Democrats or Republicans will do well in it. Look, and another thing is a perfect example of this is in 2008 we had, by the way, at that time I thought one of the highest turnouts we would have in my lifetime of voters, and they ushered in Barack Obama, a Black man with a Muslim sounding name, and Democrats won up and down the ticket. It wasn't like in 2010, all of those voters were like, you know what, we were completely wrong, and we want to take back our country, so we're now going to switch from Barack Obama and the Democrats and all these progressive Democrats that we elected in 2008, and we're now going to vote for the Tea Party. That's not what's happened. It's a different electorate. If you look at 2010, it dips down to 41%. And that's 41%. It was an electorate that was older, less diverse, and more conservative. And
And so, Cornell, is that so? Is that essentially what happened this time? So when we look at, because I see the up and down here, and when I think about the moments where, and I think what you're saying is in the electorate changes when the electorate gets smaller, right? That means the electorate is going to be whiter, more Republican, and therefore you're going to have those outcomes when the turnout is higher, that like we see in presidential years or in that maybe anomaly of 2018, you have more people turning out, which means you have more people of color coming into the electorate. And so therefore you have the kinds of folks getting elected that we need to be in office.
You tend to have more voters of color that are making up a larger proportion of that electorate. Again, it's about the proportion. And you tend to have younger voters making up a larger portion of that of that electorate as well. And so that's been a trend line for the last couple of elections. But something happened in 2024 that that is, quite frankly, an amazing phenomenon. And I know a lot of our hot takes and our pundits want to make it all about the price of eggs. But what Trump just did wasn't about the price of eggs. It was about something much more fundamental to American politics than that. And it was a page right out of the Southern strategy, which was a strategy, as most of you all know, that Republicans, founded by Atwater, that if you drive racial aversion, if you drive resentment politics, you can mobilize and energize white voters.
So if you can make white voters angry and do it in a way that perhaps isn't so direct, which is what Atwater is saying here in this quote, like just don't be too overtly racist, but signal and dog whistle, and then people will know what you mean. And then you will be able to mobilize that anger and that resentment and get people to turn out.
Right. Underneath all that is the same variable, and that is us versus them. Right. So you're exactly right. So what he, like, literally, you start off 54 and say nigga, 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 but you can't say that anymore. So you got to talk about busing, and you got to talk about welfare queens. You got to talk about, I'm going to give you back your country, which was what Donald Trump talked about. And when he said that, again, folks understand what he's saying. And they're eating your cats and dogs. It's not an economics argument, at least not in the way that most of our pundits are thinking about it as an economic argument. Now, right, to the present, right? Again, it's a game of inches. Right. Kamala Harris won 41, Vice President Harris won 41% of the white vote again, very much in line with where Biden was in this past election, right? And in fact, very few things change from a percentage-wise of her performance among some of the key groups, right? Except for one, which I'll talk about here. Yep. What changed was, and this is very dramatic, and quite frankly, something that if you said, Cornell, that the electorate in 2024 would be dramatically wider than the electorate in 2020, I would say I don't think that's probable, because it's not something that we see happening where the composition of the electorate from a racial standpoint reverses itself by 3 or 4 points, right? Something dramatic has to be happening for that to happen. But what we saw was the 2024 electorate was wider than the 2020 electorate. And Trump was able to remarkably grow the white share of the electorate at a time they were shrinking as a population, right? So as a campaign, look, I'm going to put away all the racism and the authoritarianism and how much I despise what they represent in America, but purely as a campaign strategist, they did something remarkable and something that once upon a time we were doing, and that was they grew their electorate on purpose, right? So you had an electorate that grew dramatically wider, and so you saw both pullback in millions of, so the electorate became a lot less brown and a lot wider. And the most dramatic differences in turnout from 2020 to 2024 weren't, in fact, in the swing states. And most of the swing states, again, Biden won most of the swing states in 2020 by a point, right? In some of those swing states, it wasn't a point. It was literally, find me what 15, 12,000 votes, and I'll take care of the rest. I think Trump has said, right? It's just literally several thousand votes between them in these states. So most of the swing states, it was a fight, virtually still to a tie, to a standstill. He did increase his overall raw vote number in most of these battleground states from rural areas. But what's most dramatic is, and why I think it's important for us to have a more expansive look and conversation about engagement, is Harris received nearly the same number of votes as Biden in the swing states, but we lost approximately 8 million votes across the solid red and blue states. This is where the drop off of the voters from 2020 to 24 really impacted Dems up and down the ballot. Look, and if so, in the blue states, Harris' percentage of Biden's total was 88%. So she got 88% of his votes in those blue states. Trump total was 102, so he got slightly above, and the solid blue states. But just California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, Massachusetts accounts for 4 million of the votes Harris lost compared to Biden. And not that they swung to Trump, they just weren't there, right?
And if you talk about, didn't come out.
Right. And if you talk about, and why this is important, because Hakeem Jeffries and House Democrats really were dependent on a lot of those votes, especially in places like California and New York, where the really sort of much of the battle for the take back the House was going to be pitched. Mm-hmm. And we had approximately 5 million voters, 5 million less voters.
So Cornell, what should people take away from this? Because I think there's both, because this when I saw you talk about this the other day, this slide in particular was important, not just because the reflection of the sort of drop off in blue states, and there's a whole host of reasons for that.
And red states, yeah, and the solid red states.
In the solid red states, but there's also what's important for people to know is that we fought tooth and nail in the battleground states, in the states where we all were focused, where many of us, I should say, were focused. People did the work. They did the work that they needed to do in terms of getting our votes out. So in Georgia, for example, we saw Vice President Harris actually gain votes, right, over Joe Biden's 20 numbers. So what is the takeaway that folks should have? We also know that we had, I think is it 3 million less Black voters turned out in this election as well. Is that number accurate?
Well, it's approximation. I didn't go to that slide because you didn't want me, because that wasn't one of the slides you put in from your show. But yeah, overall, you've got about 6 million less brown people in this electorate, and most of those brown people were outside of the battleground states, right? So what you had is in the swing states, you did fight tooth and nail and realize a lot of that 2020 electorate, but you did not realize it. And he grew the white electorate in those states. And again, a state like Georgia, look at where around the ring counties, it was a fight to a standstill like it was in 2020, right, with the numbers. But in those rural, more wider counties, they absolutely grew their white electorate there. I think the main takeaway from here is that you do have to be engaged further out from a standpoint of time with these voters, but you also got to be more engaged in more than just 4 or 5 states, especially when you think about what's happening down ballot and what's important in all 50 of these states, and especially in places that are outside of the central 5 or 6 battleground states where the House and the Senate and a lot of state races are being determined are very important.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for that, because I do feel like there's both the like trying to engage our community in the last 3 weeks of an election after people have already voted, which was also a really critical mistake in my opinion, right? That there was this sense that the Democrats could wait into the last minute as they always do. And in this case, it was particularly wrongheaded because we told people to go vote early. So you can't both tell people to go vote early and cast mail and absentee ballots and then actually not engage them until after the period of time when they've already cast those ballots. And then the other thing that's really important that you said is that we cannot just think that if we just focus on 3 or 4 or 5 battleground states that we'll be able to win national elections. That we can't, right? That it's not clear. Clearly, we cannot. And then the last thing I would say is that's important about your analysis here is that it's the racism, stupid, right? And so, like, while they want to talk about the economy and the price of eggs, Trump's closing argument was not about the price of eggs. Right. The man had held a racist rally in Madison Square Garden, and that was his closing argument to his base. And it moved those people. Right. It moved them to the polls in higher numbers. To your point, we should not have seen the white electorate grow. And we did. But it also means that in other places, in some of the battleground states and outside of battleground states, we need to make sure that we are moving our folks as well, because many of them made a choice to stay home, which is what we said the threat always was. Right, the threat wasn't Black men not voting for Kamala. The threat wasn't Black people moving away from the Democratic Party. That was not the threat. The threat was people making the decision to stay home. And that's what we see, I think, in your numbers.
Yep. That's spot on. And the other piece of that I think is really important that you talked about is, and we got the new data coming in showing it, is that we've got to engage voters further out. Yep. And we can't wait till the last moments to spend so much of our resources, because the election actually a month out, the election was basically over.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Cornell. Well, thank you for all of that. As more data comes in, obviously we'll know more. The picture will become clearer. I think the point that you've been trying to make to everyone who will listen is that all this business about the Democratic Party needs to rethink what it's doing and what voters it's talking to is actually absolute nonsense, because we know how elections get won, and it isn't by shrinking the party, right? It isn't by reducing itself down to some set of voters who, in fact, are never going to vote for Democrats again. But what do we know? What do we know? All right. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. We appreciate you always and all that you bring to help us be smarter.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, Jess is asking about questions. Jess, do we have questions or are we moving?
You can answer all the questions, Adrianne.
Okay, I'll answer all the questions. I don't think we have them. So folks should know though, and I'll say, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat on the feed, and we'll take them. Thanks, Cornell. Appreciate you. Okay, so we want to take some time. So that's sort of the national picture. And as I said at the top, in states, whether they're battleground states or not, there were some significant wins. And so what we want to do now is actually sort of transition into a conversation with some of our partners from those states who were doing the work, not only to turn out the vote for the presidential election, but because there were also critical races in states, whether they were ballot measures, whether they were Supreme Court, state Supreme Court races, whether they were state legislative races, huge fights, huge battles happening in our states that weren't just about the presidential. And so I want to bring in three of three of our friends and partners from states where BlackPAC has been working for some time or partnering with folks in those states. First, I want to bring in Kayla Reed, who is the Executive Director of Action St. Louis. I want to bring in Mondale Robinson, who is the founding principal of the Black Male Voter Project. And I want to bring in Branden Snyder, who is a senior advisor with Detroit Action. Branden is maybe one of the last folks I saw before election day, and I was glad that I got a chance to see you. So I want to just kick this off because again, there were obviously many challenges in this election, and Cornell laid out some of them, including the sort of resource issues that I think all of our groups experience in terms of being able to raise the money and get the money out into the field to be able to have the conversations that we had been saying we need to be having. So there was those challenges, and then there was just a lot, right? So yes, a lot of races that sometimes weren't getting the attention that they needed because they're being overwhelmed by the presidential. But each of you had significant races in your states that I want to just give some lift and some light to, because there were important battles that you all fought. And Kayla, I want to start with you, because I think that oftentimes when folks think about Missouri, they just see it as a red state, right? They see it as a state where we can't get any victories out of it. But you all have some big wins. And I want to just give you a moment to talk about some of the things that you all won, particularly on the ballot measure side.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Adrianne. I think Missouri has been inside of the conversation that we remain in 2024, that we are a tale of two stories. We are the state that the Democratic Party has essentially abandoned after 2008. One of the first stories I heard when I became an organizer was that Barack Obama lost Missouri in 2008 by less than 3,000 votes, and there were still people in line voting. And the subsequent decision that Obama lost this state took resources out of this state, and those resources have never returned. And thus, Missouri is not red, Missouri is neglected. And so when you neglect and abandon a base inside of a state and the other party decides to double down, then you start to see the red wave that we've seen in Missouri. The other story that is not attached to the Democratic Party at all is the story of movement building in Missouri that has been very consistent since 2006, but has really been victorious in this realm of ballot initiatives since around 2016. And so what we've seen since 2016 is that in 2018, Missouri, Claire McCaskill loses her bid for the U.S. Senate. On the same ballot, Missouri passes minimum wage to raise us to $13 and ethics reform. In 2020, we expand Medicaid. In 2022, we passed recreational marijuana. And in 2024, we're the first state in the nation to end a total abortion ban and raise minimum wage to $15 an hour and establish earned sick leave for workers in the state. And so how does
That's a lot, Kayla. I want to just that is a lot. It is a story that we are not talking about.
No, and so what happens is the headlines come out after the election and say, oh, Missouri's sort of a Cinderella story. Well, actually, we've been working, right? And this is momentum that's been building cycle after cycle. This is strategists in state. These are organizations that work together. I chair our C4 table in our state. And so thinking about what power building looks like, and also understanding that the demographic of voters who can pass a ballot initiative like ending a total abortion ban are not all Democratic voters. And so we have to sort of do a job of talking to people about the issues. And that result says that the number one vote, the line on the ballot that got the number one votes in our state was the president. The second line that got the second number of total votes was the abortion ballot initiative, which means more people voted on the abortion ballot initiative than they did for the U.S. Senate race.
Yeah.
That means they went to the voting place, turned the paper over, went to the bottom of the page, skipped over Josh Hawley and Lucas Kuntz and voted to end the abortion ban.
Yeah.
That means they're not connecting to candidates. They don't see their future, their family, their security inside of that, but they trust the organizations, the messaging, and the work of the ballot initiative process in our state to get things done like that.
And they're voting directly on the policies that they want. I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, people are like, I know I need this. Mondale, I'm gonna bring you in because I think that North Carolina really is the other example here of a place where big things were won in a challenging election. And North Carolina, I mean, I think Kayla could have said what she said about Missouri being neglected, state, right? And so let me just bring you in to talk about North Carolina and what the work that lots of folks, including you all, did to get some pretty significant victories.
Yeah, I think, I think for me, and not to talk too much about the national like picture, but I think what we saw in 2024 was a rejection of this idea that the top of the ticket will influence the bottom of the ticket in a way that's positive. So I think we should really reject this narrative that we need to do what these people in Washington, D.C. keep telling us, which is focus solely on elections during election cycles and act as if our people don't need to see us all the time. For me, North Carolina said that in a way that was extremely loud. We spent all of our time in North Carolina at Black Male Voter Project in the 41 eastern counties. We know for people who are not familiar with the state, North Carolina has 100 counties, 41 counties east of Raleigh. So while people like to put Raleigh in the eastern North Carolina, Raleigh has a different makeup. It's very rich, whereas the 41 states east of it is poor, rural, and a lot of the majority Black counties. Actually, all of the majority Black counties are in eastern North Carolina. So we had two targets. We wanted to make sure that we won the first congressional district again, which is a district that historically was majority Black, but they added some more white counties to make it a little whiter. But we still weren't able to win that election. But what was most important was we needed to unelect the oldest Democratic candidate who was also voting with Republicans the most in the state legislature, who was a white man who was representing a district that was majority Black. And that was in the 27th House District. And people aren't talking about what it means to elect a millennial against an incumbent who beat him by 20, 30 percentage points out in eastern North Carolina. We were able to do that in a way when we saw the party itself lose Black voters by sitting out elections. We didn't see that at the state level. And I think Rodney Pierce's race offers opportunity of what happens when you engage, when you have organizations like Down Home, when you have orgs like AP, when you have orgs like Black Male Voter Project that are working in communities where the national party, where the state parties are not willing to spend money. And then you're engaging these people, you're able to do things that people don't even see as targeted racists. So we get to rewrite what's possible. And we did that by sending a young Black millennial who represents the district, live in the district, who will not vote with Republicans. And it also helps with the Democrat. We picked up 8 seats to stop the supermajority, even though we see our Republican neighbors right now trying to steal power before our Democratic people take over. So go ahead.
I'm gonna come back and ask both you and Kayla about that because I think we saw, this is not the first time we've seen this where there are huge wins and then immediately the Republican legislatures try to undo the wins. But I think that you just big, same as what Kayla described, just big wins, breaking the supermajority in the state legislature, huge. Winning the governor's race, obviously huge, because the other way would have been not good. And then the third thing was the Supreme Court seat, the state Supreme Court seat, which is also huge. And there'll be another one. I think Anita's up next year, right?
Yes.
Another state Supreme Court race next year. So that's just the importance of, helping people understand that year in and year out matters because elections don't happen in our states every 4 years, right? And so I think that's
and also what Cornell said about stepping out further, meaning not just focusing on Durham, Charlotte, and Raleigh. There are 370,000 votes that we don't even engage with. When we were talking to Black men in Eastern North Carolina, the only other org, like I'm talking about in some of these red counties where there's no chance of us winning, but we just need to lose better. We didn't see any other door hangers on these brothers' park. When we was in the trailer park, only thing we saw were Donald Trump door hangers on these brothers' doors. So the idea that they're going where we won't go is having an effect on how they show up. And while more of them didn't vote for Trump, more of them sat out this election, and that too hurts.
Right, right. All right, Branden, let's talk about, do I need to say what up though first before we get into Kayla says yes.
Yes, yes. What up, though? How are you doing?
I'm good. So let's talk about Michigan. So you know, a lot of challenges in mobilizing folks, same challenges I think that we've just heard described, but also some wins, right? And I think some historic wins in a way. So want to give you some space to lift up you know, sort of both what happened and also the sort of important victories that came out of the cycle.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to like double down on like two things. One that Cornell mentioned, but also just came up a second ago with Mondale, is that the race here in Michigan at the top of the ticket was close. It wasn't like this was some blowout. It wasn't like this was some, massive mandate that Trump has amongst Black voters, or the Republican Party has amongst voters, period. Harris lost by 1.5%. So this is not like this is some, gravitating change things. What that means is Black and brown voters stay home, and that they didn't have anything that actually engaged them. And for us that run organizations, we know a lot of that comes down to not the party apparatus not connecting issues, what people care about and what they want to talk about, economic justice issues, but on a day-to-day basis. Our organizations across the board have had the scoop that we need to talk about working class issues day in and day out. So for a lot of pundits to say the party needs to discuss this is mind-blowing, because that's what we've been doing. But we haven't been offered the resources or the year-round apparatus to be able to do this, or we're competing against a party that is not passing policy to be able to do that in a real and effective way sometimes. So in Michigan, one of the things that's happened is we see, again, 1.5%, change in the state. In Detroit, how that shows up is that Trump actually picks up about 9,000 additional votes to, move his total from a little under 11,000, a little over 11,000 to closer to 20,000. Not a blowout, because Harris again still wins by 10 times the amount of votes that he gets. In Michigan, again, he only wins by 82,000 votes. Period, compared to in 2020, Trump losing by 150,000 votes that Biden received.
Right.
In counties like Wayne County and counties like Saginaw and Oakland County, that's where the difference is. It also requires funders, requires pundits, whatever, to not just think of Black as Detroit. Now, granted, Detroit is the Blackest city in the state. It is the home where most of our folks, are at. But we've got cousins in Saginaw, we've got cousins in Flint, we've got cousins in Grand Rapids, we got cousins in Lansing. And so that means being clear and being really specific that you gotta, if you want to actually engage Black voters, if you want to actually win Black voters, you got to be in Benton Harbor. You got to be in Muskegon, places that folks don't typically consider to be Black voting areas, but have large Black communities that are make or break, that actually didn't get spoken to, but were able to win on local issues. So when you look at the Benton Harbor School Board, they were able to flip a school board to have a pro-school board slate of all Black candidates who've been actually fighting the governor on debt, school debt. Right. They've been fighting, when you look at the state of Michigan and the city of Detroit, you got organizations that were able to win campaigns and win a county millage on funding public school education, making sure that billionaires were paying their fair share of taxes. And then when we think about like actually engaging Black, and winning Black candidates, I reject this notion that some folks have that Black folks can't win statewide in Michigan, because we look at Kyra Bowden Harris, who was the state Supreme Court candidate, who won her seat and won so well and with such a majority that it was one of the first victories called in the night, while people were still trying to figure out if what was happening in the state on the presidential. Now, meanwhile, again, going back to this mandate, whatever that they want to say in Michigan, you know, the Republicans actually lost votes on the Senate race. There were fewer folks that showed up, just like Kayla mentioned around with abortion in Missouri. Folks decided that they were going to vote for Trump. Some folks decided they were voting for Trump and then just left the rest of the ballot blank, or they voted for Trump, maybe voted for their state rep, left the ballot blank, which means that there was a pickup again for our U.S. Senate race. That there's actually more votes for Alyssa Slockins than Harris. What that means, however, is that organizations, groups like ours, campaigns have to do the work to continue to win, continue to have conversations, to be able to fill out those gaps. And then finally, just want to connect it back to the local issues and year-round organizing, is that Michigan is coming out of a once-in-a-generation trifecta. So in 2022, you know, it was reproductive justice on the ballot. It was voting rights that were on the ballot. It was a governor who, you know, has extremely high favorables in the Black communities. You know, we call Gretchen Whitmer Big Gretch and have given her Cartier buff glasses to be able to wear around and come out to rap songs. So she leaned in on that. And what you saw was massive waves of turnout, which then allowed for this trifecta. But the party didn't deliver on that trifecta and engage with organizations on housing, on criminal justice, or you name it. So we got to actually give people something to vote for. And like Terrence Woodbury at his strategy says, we got to show them the transaction of their vote. That if you vote for something, it's like a gumball machine. That there is something that we get in return. So that's the thing that our organizations got to continue to fight for here in Michigan as we lead this election.
Yep. Well, thank you all for that. I'm going to ask you all to come back. We're going to sort of talk a little bit for a moment about the national scope, and then I'm going to ask you all to come back and answer a couple of other questions, because I do want to get to this thing about we win and then people try and immediately. I mean, it's been weeks since the election, and Republicans are already at work, right? In both Missouri and in North Carolina and in other places, right? Trying to unroll what voters just told them that they wanted, right? So I want, if you all can hang on with this, I want to bring in a couple of other folks, and then we'll come back and talk about the challenges and what we need to do going forward. So I'm gonna shift to kind of a national landscape. Kayla talked about ballot initiatives in Missouri that were won, which is obviously an important way for voters to just, I mean, we call it direct democracy, right? It's voters voting directly on the kind of policy changes that we want. There were ballot initiatives across the country, ballot measures on people's ballots across the country. And I want to actually bring in Quentin Savwoir, who's the director of programs at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. And I always want to say, Quentin, I always want to say BISC, and then I realize that, you know, everybody don't know what BISC is. I got to say the whole word, or the whole name. I also want to bring in Holli Holiday, who's with Sister Lead, Sister Vote, and a co-convener of Black Women Vote. And because when one of the, obviously, clearly part of the overarching narrative of this election was about Black women. And so, and I don't want to preempt you too much, Holly, but I think that one of the downsides of punditry and everyone shaping whatever narrative they want to, and then putting it out there, excuse me, has been this sort of sense that, well, like Kamala Harris won, so Black women didn't do nothing, right? And I think that that is not true. And I think we're going to put that to rest today. But Quentin, I'm going to start with you. I talked to you, what feels like a year ago now. It was literally weeks ago, right? About ballot measures across the country. And I asked you what you all were tracking, what were, you know, things that felt like they were going to come, you know, sort of come through. Kayla talked about some of those in terms of what happened in Missouri. But what were other ballot measures that you all were tracking, and which ones came through in terms of winning things for working people and for communities of color across the country?
For sure. On election night, we saw a real mixed bag when it comes to ballot measures. Over the summer, we planned as an organization at BISC for all types of scenarios. And what we learned is that we ended up with the mixed bag scenario. What we learned through ballot measures is that when you take the partisanship and when you take the candidates out of the ethos and you are talking to people about the issues, you attract all kind of folks that are supportive of issues. So, of course, the bright spot on election night when it comes to ballot measures was around reproductive justice. We know that Black women are dying in disparate rates in childbirth in this country. And with the reversal of Roe versus Wade, this was the first time that reproductive justice had been on the ballot in a presidential cycle. And as Kayla mentioned earlier, we saw a lot of people turn out specifically with care for that particular cause. There were 12 ballot measures related to reproductive justice across 11 states. 7 of those won. And technically, if you ask me, I'm going to include Florida in there because I don't want to live in a world where 57% isn't winning. 57% is the majority. But in Florida, you got to hit 60. And I'm just like, that is a clear demonstration of how we are really living in upside down times. Arizona passed a ballot measure to protect the right to choose. Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, Missouri, of course, Montana, Nebraska. Nebraska was really confusing because they had 2 ballot measures around reproductive justice on the ballot. The one that prevailed was the one that would limit your ability to abortion to 12 weeks, whereas the other was more around 24 weeks. Nevada, obviously, question 6. I'm based in Nevada. That will have to be on the ballot again because it's a constitutional amendment. In Nevada, you have to pass it twice in 2 elections back to back. And then, of course, New York, Prop 1, which was really more about equal rights, but inherent in that language was a protection around abortion. So it was a very good night for ballot measures when it comes to reproductive justice. Another thing that is worth lifting up are the civil rights gains that we made. There were a lot of wins around repealing bans on marriage, so the right to marry. It was also really important to spotlight the education measures that won on election night. In Colorado, in Kentucky, and in Nebraska, voters rejected a repeal of publicly funding schools. And this is something like we've been seeing this since No Child Left Behind, circa 2004, this desire to incentivize private organizations and vouchers to undermine public schools. Well, we know who that disproportionately impacts and affects, right? And with all this rhetoric around dismantling the Department of Education, this is something that we all need to be keeping our eyes on. In an economic justice vein, we saw Alaska increase its minimum wage and pass earned paid sick days. Arizona defeated a measure that would allow tipped workers to be paid 25% less. Now, listen, everything has gone up. Why are we trying to take away people's money? It just don't make no sense. In Massachusetts, question 3 provides for unionizing of transportation network drivers. Those are our Lyft and Uber drivers. Missouri, of course, Prop A. And I'm from Missouri. I'm so proud of the work that's being done in that state because it is not a red state. It's a state that's just not invested in. My dad worked for UPS growing up, and on days that I could go to work with him, we'd drive across the state and we would talk to folks who probably hadn't seen Black people before, but their issues were the same issues that my mom and my dad were talking about at the dinner table. You know what I'm saying? So it's not a state that's just so extremist. It's just a state that doesn't get enough attention. Of course, Nebraska passed paid sick days and Oregon passed unionization of cannabis workers. So those were very big wins. I also want to name that democracy was also on the ballot, specifically in Arizona. They're doing a lot of interesting stuff in Arizona. Voters rejected a measure that would have required signature gathering for ballot initiatives to be based on geographical thresholds across the state. Well, in a state like Arizona that's predominantly rural, that's hard. That makes it challenging for signature gatherers to get out to places that are not easy to get to, thus impeding on the ballot measure process, you know? And they also rejected a measure in Arizona that would allow for a single citizen to challenge the constitutionality of a ballot measure. So all of these challenges to take away our power are alive and well, and they're not going away. They're not going away.
Yeah. So I think that this is important. And there's just in terms of the idea of direct democracy, that people will turn out if they have, if they feel like voting is going to make a direct impact on their lives. And so the passage of the ballot initiatives, I think, is an important way to demonstrate that. But I also think that it helps. I think I don't know if it was Mondale earlier who said it also, or no, it was Branden. it also is a reflection of the fact that we've been talking about issues, working class issues, issues that are going to benefit working people. That's a part of the ballot initiative conversation in many of these places when we think about the economic justice ballot initiatives that were passed. So, you know, the idea that that conversation isn't happening is wrong. It just isn't happening in the way that it needs to, and it isn't being reflected in the platforms or messaging of some of the national candidates.
And
Alyssa, I know you had a question for Holly.
Yeah, I did. So, you know, as we kind of have to shift to the 92%, right? We want to talk about what the influence of Black women was. There's obviously, Adrianne alluded to it earlier, this narrative that Black women lost during the election because of the top of the ticket, but there were actually quite significant gains. Can you share just your perspective on the gains that were had during this election cycle for Black women?
Listen, this was a great year for Black women for sure. Let me start with this. Hello, welcome to the Senate, Black women. We had two Black women who were elected to serve in the U.S. Senate, and it would not be fair if I didn't also acknowledge that at no time in our history have we had five Black people serving in the United States Senate at one time. So certainly we had the net gain for Black women and go Black women, but let's talk about Black people in its entirety. And this is a rare moment for me because usually I'm all Black women 10 toes down, but I just think especially because of what we're going to see in the Senate, because of the kinds of ways that we're going to need senators to show up, we're happy to be at that level of representation in the United States Senate. And so there may be one that's kind of questionable, but four strong voices.
Kind of questionable, Holly.
One that's on the side who frankly may not be in the Senate, may get appointed into the administration. And so that will create some different opportunity. But even four is more than we've ever had at one time. So there is a lot of joy there. People will tell you that I have been 100% at peace because Black people showed up in this election, Black women in particular, but not alone. And also just one more shout out for the brothers. Again, normally not where I stand on my toes, but I'm gonna be there today. There's no other demographic where we see the parity between the way men and women vote as with Black people. So even though they are not quote unquote equal, they still, Black men show up. And so I encourage Black men, Mondale, you know, I know this is absolutely your ministry. Take back the narrative about Black men. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it took Black women 3 cycles to move our narrative because we've been voting this way for a while. This is the first cycle where we're actually seeing some love. When they start pointing the fingers at who did what, when, and where, it always ends with the tagline, Black women showed up, Black women did what they said they were going to do. And I'm going to finish the tagline by saying, and Black women won a lot of freaking stuff. And so let me just get into that. Beyond the Senate, I'm happy to support that every single Black woman incumbent that was on the general election ballot won. We didn't lose nobody. Now, we lost Cori Bush. I'm from Missouri as well. So, yay, shout out for my Show Me State colleagues who are here as well. We did lose Cori Bush in the primary, but everybody who made it to the general, they all coming back, even the ones who we were worried about. And I also need to say this narrative. Black people ain't just electing each other. You got people like Summer Lee and Amelia Sykes that are running in white majority districts. Amelia Sykes in particular, her district is 92% white. So this narrative that we're just electing ourselves, again, false, 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 and false. And you are definitely not winning any statewide race without having a diverse coalition, including white people, support you. And so when we talk about those senators, many of these congressional districts are gerrymandered to the hilt, and yet This year, again, my little Black men shout out, we have grown the Congressional Black Caucus by 3 members. So this is we had the largest last cycle, and this cycle we done added 3 more, including a Black woman from frickin' Oregon. Do you think yes, there are Black people in Oregon, but not enough to elect a United States Congresswoman. So we have to, again, get past this narrative. Here's the narrative that's real. Yes, America is racist. Yes, misogynist. Yes, sometimes fascist. Definitely experiences and practices sexism. But Black people win anyway. And the sooner we move that narrative, the sooner we get on that page and stop waiting for this, immaculate change to happen and get on the page of we just have to do the work. It may take us a little bit longer, and we need the investment, not just of funders, whoever those funders are, but let's start investing in our own people, because the other thing that we saw, which I learned this past week, is a market investment increase. We saw more donors of color, Black people, donating to campaigns, donating to causes, and we need to make sure that we're investing and keeping that trend going. I'm already on my soapbox, so let me just continue on, because I am definitely here to bring the joy. Over the course of the last 3 cycles, we actually have seen Black women run in every single state in this union. Yes, that includes Alaska. It includes Iowa, Hawaii, Wyoming, all the places Black people are on the ballot. Before I get into digging into some more numbers, I also want to note that we are also making strides in the infrastructure that supports that supports candidates, period. We do not have any Republican state party chairs, but Black women chair the state party for the Democrats in 6 states. And they are not what you all consider to be this whole idea of red and blue. We have Georgia, we have Kansas, Michigan, Nevada, Oregon, South Carolina. You know the mix, so you know those are not all blue places, but Black women are chairing those parties. And in a space where we are now looking at a new Democratic chair, that's going to make a difference. So just think about that. I'm going to continue though on my.
Holli, I'm gonna ask. I'm actually going to bring everyone back in. I'm gonna let you do a little bit more numbers, but I want to bring everyone back in because I want to talk. I also want to move to talk a little bit about what we're thinking about going forward, and because you just actually alluded to something that's really important about what the future holds, right? And so I think, and I'll name it because you brought it up, which is that there's about to be a new chair of the Democratic Party, and whoever that's going to be, although we can imagine who it might be, who's not going to be, but there's also really, as we think about like the work that our organizations are going to be doing, et cetera, we also know that state Democratic parties are going to be also very important. And if as this sort of, I don't even know if I want to call it a battle, but sort of this struggle inside the party about, do we, do what many of the Democrats did immediately after the election, which is essentially to attack their own voters, right? To go after voters of color. If who runs and controls not just the national party, but the state parties as well. That is who is going to determine the direction of the Democratic Party. So I want to put a question out to folks about there are 2 things. Maybe it's 2 questions that I want to ask people to answer, and then hopefully the BlackPAC team is coming in here as well. But I want to ask 2 questions of folks, and I don't know how we're going to do this. We're going to try and round robin this quick, I think. But the one question is about the future and what are people thinking about in terms of the work going forward. And then the second one is, obviously this was a hard election. right? It was a very difficult election, and people in our communities are still grappling and still processing. I was saying earlier that Holli and I were at a convening of Black women earlier this week, and people are struggling. People are feeling grief, right? People are feeling grief, and it isn't just about because we lost an election, right? I think that's like we win and we lose elections, but it was about how we lost the election and who we lost it to and what that portends for the future. And so I think that, you know, Holli, one of the sisters that was in the gathering did this really great thing, I think, where she asked us all to think about what gifts our ancestors had given us that will help us to get through this next period of America. And so she said, what did your grandmothers give you? Right? What did your great grandfather give you that you know that you have inherently that you will use to carry on and to carry forward? And so there is this thing about resilience that we also have to get through. And so we were all thinking, right, Holli, like, oh, what my grandmother gave me. What I get from my great grandfather, right? And so, and because I'm gonna hold on to that, you know, someone said we just need to. This is a moment to be as Black as possible, right? Like if you got to cook greens every day to get through, then you need to cook greens every day. But what are those things, right, that we are holding on to? One of the sisters said, you know, I'm listening to gospel every day. And she said, no, in fact, I'm listening to Negro spirituals, right? Like I'm going all the way back, right? And I'm gonna hold on to that to get to this next period. So I would like for you all to, and you can, let me do this, either one of those two questions, right? Like, what are you thinking about in terms of going forward? And what are you doing to sort of hold on to the resilience? What are you taking forward to make sure that not just you, but your family, your community, that we all of the communities that we are a part of, what are we doing to sort of hold on and take it forward? So Holli, I'm gonna come back to you to answer you know, one of those two questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. Listen, being from Missouri, Kansas City, you know, we have about 12% Black people, which is about where we sit nationwide. And Black people win there all the freaking time. And a lot of the reason that they win there is because they are organized. And what we take away from this year's election is Black people have never been more organized, never been more collaborative, never known and seen each other. And we still have work to do. I'm not suggesting that we have maximized that. And I think that's what we lean into. My ancestors gave me two things. They gave me the spirit of responsibility for myself and my people, and the spirit of accountability. And what I have learned from Black women and Black people that I marry accountability and responsibility with is grace and forgiveness. And so with those four qualities, I am very much at peace that I am doing what I'm supposed to do. And more importantly, that my community in this election did what it's supposed to do. And the most important, that we are poised to do a lot more in the future. So watch us work.
Watch us work. Mondale, I'm gonna go to you.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, I think this moment just reminds me that, you know, being Black, loss is baked into the process. Like, right, we're used to America not giving us what we're owed. We're used to doing the work and then checks being withheld, or we get a bill at the end of the year. So, you know, the idea of sharecropping didn't just end with our grandparents and our parents. It continues now with the work that we do socially. So I think for me, what I'm carrying to get me through is that, you know, slavery didn't end when Denmark Vesey was upset in his revolt. So I'm just going to continue to fucking revolt.
Yep. Branden.
My grandma worked for my entire life, and even is working now, you know, on you know, in kitchens, at restaurants, you know, at casinos, at hospitals, you know, doing domestic work. And the thing that I take from her, take it even into being a community organizer, is hustle and grit and discipline. And I think that that's the thing that we are going to have to continue to show and continue to have to deliver as we talk about our individual movement. Because the name of the game that we're going to have to show and improve is independent political power for our organizations, for our movement that can leverage and move whatever party is in power. And like that's going to require that type of discipline, that type of rigor, and a little bit of joy.
Yeah, and a lot of joy. We got plenty of, I will say. Quentin.
Thank you. In my BISC capacity, we are continuing to double down in our states, continuing to double down in ballot measures. I've been talking a lot about creating the world that we deserve requires us to process some of our own trauma and care for our spirits so that we can imagine a world where we can be dependent on one another and not so dependent on this system that Mondale said, wasn't created for us and doesn't really return the fruit of our investment to us. So we are doubling down in the states, making sure we're having those intentional conversations and really building people-based power that continue to be there beyond something being on the ballot. What did my grandmother give me? It's so interesting that you actually asked that question because my grandmother's still alive. She's 93, and she has named to me that she's very scared about what's on the horizon. She's never seen it be this crazy before. And she recently, I moved her to Las Vegas to be closer to me. And in one of the moves, we came across an old copy of Dr. King's Where Do We Go From Here? This was my grandfather's book. I never got to meet my grandfather. He died like 10 days after I was born in 1986. And my grandmother gifted, she said, you should just keep that book. You should just be reading it. And I've never read Where Do We Go From Here? So that's what I've been doing the last 2 weeks. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And it just seems so appropriate for this moment because it does feel extremely chaotic. But I just happen to think that if we build enough buy-in in each other, we build enough community in each other, then all the circus show happening in DC, it won't impact us as much if we can build community and figure out how can we supplement and take care of one another. Because that's really what it's about, taking care of one another.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kayla.
Yeah, I want to answer the question. I also just want to say to the Black folks watching, to my comrades who I love on the call, a Democrat in the White House is not my North Star. A Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate and the House is not my North Star. I understand that these are safe houses along the way, but we deserve more, we need more, and we have to fight for more. And this moment really requires us to think independently of any political party and actually what Black people need and deserve in this time and what our power as organizations need to be. We need to become political homes for our people to weather the storm that is coming. I think about the Nadir era of United States history and what emerged out of that era, were strong Black organizations that did not just align themselves with political parties, that thought independently of those parties and fought for the power and dignity of Black people every single day. And we need to do that again in a true and powerful way. So I'm deeply, deeply committed to that. What I was raised to know and believe by my grandmother is that we are each other's business. Are you safe? Are you well? Do you have what you need? That is my business. And it is your business to know that about me. And we have to take being each other's business very seriously right now because they are not taking up the business of making sure that we are okay.
Yes, ma'am. I'm gonna ask the BlackPAC team to jump in and answer that last question. So Garrett, where are you? I saw you said you ain't cleaning greens every day. So what?
I to a previous panelist point, I have been trying to catch up on reading because I think the historical context of everything is so important. I think, as you mentioned earlier, living in DC, sometimes we get ourselves stuck in a bubble. And I'm born and raised from Alabama, small town Alabama. So I have seen what it means to live under, Republican rule for my entire life, and what it means to work either against that or through that mechanism. And so I've been trying to place everything in a historical context, because as everyone has mentioned thus far, that I think is what my parents and grandparents taught me, is to keep the focus. So right now I'm just trying to keep the focus because obviously, learning the history, you're able to work towards a better future. So I think that is my goal right now.
And Jess, what are you doing to keep the faith, to keep hope alive, to keep yourself upright?
Yeah, so I am really, really leaning into community because I feel like we're gonna really need each other. And I feel very fortunate to have two groups of people, to kind of have two political homes, one of them being Action St. Louis, where Kayla Reed is the executive director. So I get to fight like hell here in Missouri and in St. Louis specifically. And then I get to fight with all of my amazing comrades here at BlackPAC, and all of my volunteers that are watching right now. I love y'all. And I have seen all your emails, and I'll have some actions for you very soon.
And Alyssa.
My grandmother she was a quiet woman, but she was fierce. And she didn't have to say much to get her point across. And so, but one thing, as hard as she fought in life, her health is what took her, really took a turn at the end. And so my focus has been take care of my health, take care of my family's health, and give to my community. And I don't have to do that loudly. Just do it in a way that I know I am taking care of those who look like me, in spaces that are near and far.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to, for Kayla and Holli and Quentin and Mondale and Branden, I want to thank you all for taking a part of your Saturday, that you all could be spending with your family. You could be, I was about to say on the beach, but that's just because me and Holli were just near a beach, and it's like, well, no, that's not. But you all could be doing anything, and I think joining with us is really, important to us. We see you all as partners all the time. We see you as family. We see you as community, and oftentimes we don't get to sit in spaces nearly enough times. I know Mondale and I all year long have been like, oh, we need to, oh, I'm gonna call you. Oh, are you gonna be here? Oh, it was too much. And we weren't able to do it. But in this coming era, I think that it is critically important that we figure out how we, many people have said here today, that we figure out how we're taking care of each other. We figure out how we are in the spaces that we need to be together, and hopefully BlackPAC can provide some of those opportunities for us to be able to come together and strategize and have these conversations, and just love each other. So I think that I'm going to ask all the folks who are watching to take that last question to heart, though, and think about what is it that you are taking forward? What is it that you need? What is it you're taking from your ancestors, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, if you were, blessed to have had them in your life, your aunties, your uncles, and if it isn't a family member that is by blood, what are you taking forward from your chosen family? But we need something, right, to ground us. We need something that is going to hold us. And I think, to Jess's point and other folks' point, we need to be leaning into community as deeply and as strongly as we can in this next period of time, because that's what's always gotten us through, right? That is what has always gotten us over. And if there is anything that we do in this country as people, is we get over, then, now, and in the future. So I want to just make sure that we are holding on to those things. We're going to wrap up here, but just, I wanted to just give you a moment to at least say to folks, there's still stuff, there's still stuff that we can do, right? I think that I was saying on my radio show last night that, the election did not end the work. There is an incoming administration. They ain't in yet. Right. We Democrats still control the Senate. There are things they can do. Right. And so what is our charge in this moment in terms of making sure that they do what needs to be done, and that we are holding folks accountable all the way up until the transition?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we need to make sure that they are working until the very last day. So Joe Biden is still president until January 20th, and we still have the Senate majority until next year. And so we need to make sure that we are calling on Joe Biden to do what he can do now. He has time to pardon folks. So if you know folks that need to get pardoned or groups of folks that need to get pardoned, you need to be calling the White House. We saw him just pardon his son. So he's in that mindset, right? He has time to commute sentences for death row, for people who are on death row right now, because we know that Trump will definitely start up that program again of getting these people out of here. And then there are bills that we need him to sign. There might be bills that we need him to veto, and then there are executive orders that he can issue before he is gone. And then we also have things that are bills right now that we need to talk to our senators about stopping. So we have HR 9495, which is the bill that passed through the House, which would give Donald Trump unchecked power to shut down nonprofits who oppose his agenda. So we might not be sitting here talking to you anymore if Donald Trump gets this power and has his way. We also know that Donald Trump has put up a number of nominations that are one, outrageous and ridiculous, and also people who are very dangerous. And so we need to make sure that we are contacting our senators. I've not the best senators in the world here in Missouri, but I'm gonna call them and tell them that we need to make sure that we have hearings for all of these not people that are being nominated. And we will have a Republican majority in the Senate, but everyone in the Senate who's a Republican is not on Trump's side, and doesn't want to see Dr. Oz in charge of things or Elon Musk in charge of things. And so we can put pressure on them now. And then lastly, we need to take action at the state and local levels. We've heard a bunch about the fights that are happening at the state and local level. So make sure that you are connecting with organizations locally, like Action St. Louis and Detroit Action, to find out what things you need to be calling your state legislators about, your governors, if they are movable, and getting that done. And so we have a lot going on. Please stay in contact with us. BlackPAC will continue to send out ways that you can get involved at all levels, things that you can do. You can go to blackpac.com/join, or just blackpac.com and find the join button, and get emails from us, and we'll have a lot for you to do next year.
All right, let me bring back in the whole BlackPAC team. Just to say thank you to everyone for joining in on the chat. For some of our folks, our members, our volunteers, this was a new experience. People trying to figure out how to get on the live stream. So we will make sure that when we do this again, we send out instructions for people for whom this was the first time. But we want to do a lot more of these, right? Because there are voices from around the country that we need to be lifting up. We need to make sure that people know who they can be connected to, as just said. And we need to make sure that people know that we still have power. We still have power, and we are gonna organize that power, and we are gonna use that power in the best interests of our communities. And so again, it is a Saturday, and I know people could be out at the farmers market or doing whatever, maybe not at the beach, but could be any place. And we appreciate you all joining us. We went a little bit over on time, but hopefully people got something out of the conversation, whether it was Cornell's presentation about, let's be clear about what did and did not happen, what is and is not true, and something out of the victories that happened around the country. All is not lost, and we should remember that. And so we want to make sure that we continue to lift up our friends and our partners from around the country. We want to make sure that we keep you all engaged and involved. As Jess said, we'll be sending out information. You can be involved virtually. Jess, I don't know, I can't remember if you said Jess, but we're gonna, we're still gonna do phone banks. We're still gonna be texting people to make sure that they understand what's happening in the country and ways that they can get involved. We'll be doing some, hopefully some local in-person things so that people can at least feel like they are in community and can lean in to the folks around them. So we appreciate everyone. We appreciate everyone for joining, for listening. And we are still here. We are not going anywhere, regardless of what bills pass in Congress to try and take us off the map. BlackPAC is not going anywhere. And neither is anyone else on this call. None of our partners in states. We will all be in the fight. We might have to look a little different. We may have to, reimagine what our organizations are, but we are not going anywhere. So thanks to everybody again. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our partners who were able to join us today. Stay tuned.